In this part, I want to introduce the graph for the elementary functions. So these basic functions are called basic functions, and you should know the sketch of the graph for these kind of basic functions. It would be helpful for your future study. So the first function is called identity function. Which is f of x equals x. Okay. So for this function, let's see what's the graph of this function. So we draw x-axis and the y-axis, or f-axis. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3, -4. Okay. So now let's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So now let's make a table to see what is the x values and corresponding to the f values. So when x equals 0, it's equal to 0, right? So which is this point should be on the graph. When x equals 1, so this is the f of 0 equals 0, right? This is f values, so f of 1 equals what? F of x equals x. So we plug in x equals 1, so it's equal to 1. So 1 point is also on the graph, and -1. F of -1, which is -1 also, so it's here. So let's connect these points. You can, of course, you can give more points. So, but here I just want to connect these points. So you will see this straight line, which is the graph for the identity function. The next function is called the square function, or sometimes we call it quadratic function. Yeah, not quadratic. It's one of the quadratic functions. It's very special. So f of x equals x squared. Okay. So what's the graph for this one? Let's pick some numbers. Okay. We still draw a table. X and f of x. X equals 0. F of 0, which is 0 squared, right? Which is 0. So 0, 0 is on the graph. F of 1, which is equal to 1 squared, so it's equal to 1. So when x equals 1, y equals 1. So it's here. When x equals 2, f of 2 would be 2 squared, which is 4. So when x equals 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is here. So this is the point on the graph. So now let's look at how about x equals negative numbers. -1, f of -1, which is -1 squared, which is equal to 1. So when x equals -1, so it's here, it's equal to 1. When x equals -2, f of -2, which is -2 squared, which is 4 also. So -2 is here, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's here. Right? Then we use some smooth curve to connect these points. Okay. So this is the graph for the square function. So all the square function will have this kind of shape. Okay. The next one is called a cube function. Cube function is f of x equals x cubed. Y equals f of x equals x cubed, right? So this is the x values and the f values. When x equals 0, it's equal to 0 cubed. It's equal to 0. When x equals 1, it's equal to 1. 1 cube is equal to 1. When x equals 2, it's equal to 2 cubed. So it's 8. When x equals -1, which is -1 cubed, is -1. -2, -8. Okay? So now let's look at the graph. So we have these points, then we can locate 0, 0 should be on the graph. 1, 1, 1, 1, so it's here, should be on the graph, and the 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's here. This is 8. So this point should be here. 2, 8. And -1. -1. It's -1 also. This is this point, right? -2. -2 is here. 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. -8. So should be here. So now let's connect these points, use some smooth curve. You can go up. Right? So this is the graph for the cube function. Now let's look at the square function, square root function. Square root function. Square root function is given by f of x, y equals f of x equals square root of x. So now let's look at some graphs. X and f of x, some points. When x equals 0, it's equal to square root 0, which is 0, right? When x equals 1, which is equal to square root of 1, equals 1. When x equals 4, square root of 4 would be 2, right? We always choose some integers. Now can we take x to be negative number? No, because square root of x, so here x must be greater than or equal to 0. So we have no x values to be negative number. So now let's look at the graph. When x equals 0, it's equal to 0. When x equals 1, 1, 1, so it's here. When x equals 2, like 4, 1, 3, 4, equals 2. So 2, right? And so on. Of course, you can choose x equals 9, then f of x equals 3. So, but here I think it's enough. So we use some smooth curve to connect these points. So this would be the square root function. So note that there is no other parts. When x equals negative number, there is no curve anymore, because the domain of the square root function requires x to be non-negative, greater than or equal to 0. Now let's look at the cube root function. Cube root function, which is f of x equals the cube root of x. Okay, so let's look at some special points. When x equals 0, the cube root of 0 equals 0. When x equals 1, cube root of 1 equals 1. When x equals 8, cube root 8 equals 2, right? When x equals 9, cube root of 9 equals 3. So how about the negative numbers? Yes, here we have no requirement for x because it's a cube root. So x could be any real number, so let's take negative 1. Negative 1 cube root of negative 1 equals negative 1. Negative 8, which is negative 8 cube root, so which is equal to negative 2. Negative 9 cube root of negative 9 equals negative 3. Okay, so now let's draw the graph. Okay, so when x equals 0, it's equal to 0. This is 0, 0 point, right? Equals 1 equals 1. So 1 is here, 1 is here. 8, 2. When x equals 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is the 8. X equals 2. So it's here. When x equals 9, 9. X equals 3. Y equals 3. Sorry, I made a mistake. It should not be 9. 9 cube root of 9 is not 3, so it's not convenient, so we eliminate. So that's enough, okay? When x equals negative numbers, negative 1. Negative 1. So here is cube root of negative 1 equals negative 1. When x equals negative 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, negative 8. And this is 8. So it's equal to negative 2. Negative 2 is here. So it should be this point. So let's use some smooth curve to connect the points. So this is the cube root function. So now let's look at the absolute value function. Absolute value function. So which is f of x equals the absolute value of x. So remember that absolute value of x always a non-negative number, right? So here is some points, sample points, x equals 0, f equals the absolute value of 0, which is 0. X equals 1, absolute value of 1 equals 1. X equals 2, absolute value of 2 equals 2. How about negative number? Negative 1, the absolute value of negative 1 equals 1. Negative 2, so the absolute value of negative 2 equals 2. Okay, so we can use these points to draw the graph. 0, 0 is here. 1, 1, 1, 1 is here. 2, 2, 2, 2 is here. Right? And of course 3, 3 is here. Negative 1, how about negative numbers? Negative 1, negative 1 equals 1. So absolute value of negative 1 equals 1. So negative 1, 1 is here. Negative 2, 2 would be here. So let's connect these points. two straight lines, right? Like an angle, right? This is an angle. Okay, so this is the absolute value of x. So these are the elementary functions. You should know the shape of the graph for these functions.